What's happening, folks? Aruj again, and in this video I want to talk about evidence of evolution. There's actually 4 categories of evidence that we're going to go over that support the theory of evolution. The first category is fossil evidence. Next we have anatomy. Anytime you hear the word anatomy, that means that we're going to study structures of the body. So there are structures of the body that we're going to use that support the theory of evolution. We have embryology. And lastly, we have biochemical or DNA evidence. So let's talk about fossils. If you look at this horse right here, there are fossils from its previous ancestor all the way back over here. And what you notice is, over time, this organism, its descendants eventually started to lose its toes, all the way until we get the modern hoof that we know of a horse that we know today. So what this shows is the fossil record shows that things change over time. This type of animal right here isn't around today, but we do have its remnants. And it suggests things that as they change over time, so does their structure, such as the toes for this ancestral horse as changed into the hoof. The next type of evidence is called relative dating. And what relative dating does, is it compares 2 fossils found in different layers. So I know that this fossil right here must be older than the one found in this layer because it's deeper. And this is called relative dating. It's comparing 2 different fossils in 2 different layers. The closer it is to the top, the younger it is, the deeper you have to go, the older it is. That's, logical. So the oldest fossils are found in the lowest layer. The newest fossils are found in the top layer. And again, what this shows is that life has changed over time, because I'm not going to find this type of fossil. Scientists don't find this type of fossil in the younger layers. So we could deduce that this organism had to have lived only at this era and obviously gone extinct. And the contrast is true. I won't find fossils of this organism in the bottom layers, suggesting that this organism is relatively new, has evolved relatively recently. Okay, and that's relative dating. And remember, this is under fossil evidence. Next, we use anatomy. Comparative anatomy as evidence for evolution. So, the first thing I want to show you is a picture of these 4 different limbs. We have the arm of a human, a cat, a whale, and then a bat. And if you look at these, you notice they follow similar organization. So, for example, all of these limbs follow a 1 bone, 2 bone, lots of bone, digits pattern. We have 1 bone, 2 bone, lots of bone, and then the digits. And by comparing these structures, we could suggest that all of these organisms had to have had a common ancestor years ago that eventually diverged off and to create these other organisms. Again, these structures are called homologous. And if you remember, I've said this several times throughout the year, what does this prefix mean? Homo means the same. So same or similar structures found in different organisms. And they also serve different functions too. So a human is going to use his arm differently than, let's say, a bat would use their wings or the limbs. Okay? And the same is true for a cat and a whale. These would have different functions, but they have similar structure and organization. The second type of anatomy or anatomical evidence is called vestigial structures. And what a vestigial structure is, it's a body part that doesn't have much of a function. It doesn't have much use for that organism. And we could use that to suggest it may have been useful to an ancestor. So for example, whales will actually have pelvic bones. And if you know, whales are actually mammals. They have pelvic bones, suggesting that they may have had hind limbs before. Another example, would be some birds, like ostriches. Ostriches actually have no need for wings because they can't fly. And the same is true with chickens. So what this suggests is maybe there was an ancestor of an ostrich that could fly, but over time they lost that ability. Okay? And this is called vestigial structures. Not to be confused with homologous structures, which are structures that are similar, okay, in different species. The third type of evidence is embryology. And as embryos of different species are developing, you could see as a fish develops and a salamander and a tortoise and so on and so forth, you can see that all of these organisms are developing developing very, very similarly. And as they grow and mature, then they start to get more of their defined differences. But you can see that as embryos, different organisms are very, very similar in structure. And again, that represents or that suggests a common ancestor between those species. And the last type of evidence is called biochemistry. And what biochemistry does is it'll take biomolecules like proteins or DNA and compare the two. And the more similar they are, the more closely related and the more recent their common ancestor is. That's what this type of evidence suggests. So for example, if I look at the amino acids in a hemoglobin, hemoglobin is a protein that transports oxygen. That's in our red blood cells. If I look at the hemoglobin protein, a monkey's protein is about 95% identical. They're very, very similar. Whereas, let's say a chicken or a frog, we'll say a chicken, is only 69% similar to humans. So that would suggest that the chickens, the common ancestor between the chicken and the human, was even farther in the past. And a frog has 54% similarity. Our common ancestor with the frog would be even more distant into the past. Okay, so all living things have DNA, and the genes for these types of proteins are similar in different organisms, and that suggests the common ancestor. The more differences, the more distant the common ancestor. Okay, so let's recap real quick. There was 4 categories of evidence. The first type is fossil evidence, and that allows us to see change over time. The second type of fossil evidence was relative dating. Fossils found in a bottom layer are older than the fossils that are found in the top layer. The next type of evidence was anatomy, and there was 2 types of structures that I wanted you to know. There's homologous structures. What does this prefix mean? Homologous structures are similar in different species but have different functions, such as our arm versus the arm of a whale. They have different functions, but they have similar organization. Next, we had vestigial structures. These are organs that have lost their use in a species, but they may have been useful to an ancestor. There's embryology, which studies how developing embryos are similar in their earlier stages. And lastly, there's biochemical and DNA evidence, which compares those molecules. The more similar they are, the more relative they are to each other. The more closer the common ancestor. That's it for today, and I'll see you next time.